Downtown Ottawa is tightening patrols after a killing near the Rideau Centre. Ontario is preparing a fresh push in the U.S. over tariffs, and the senator's pipeline has a goalie trending in the right direction. Later in the brief, the question Ottawa is putting directly to OpenAI after a mass shooting, and what kind of reporting rules could come out of it. Ottawa first, and it's a wintry start, around -5 degrees Celsius today with snow. Ottawa police say they're building a broader safety plan for the downtown core, with more presence in hotspot areas like the ByWard Market, Rideau Street, Centretown, Bank Street, and Chinatown. The details are still being worked out, but the timing is pointed. A fatal stabbing outside an entrance to the Rideau Centre happened just hours after the police chief spoke about downtown safety at a business forum. Police have charged a 70-year-old man, Yves Brisebois, with first-degree murder. Investigators have described the killing as a personal conflict between two people. They also say the suspect was known to police and was frequently at the mall. Officers are working with Rideau Centre management, and they're maintaining a neighborhood operations center inside the mall. If you live or work downtown, the practical thing to watch is what more presence actually means. Foot patrols, transit hubs, late-night coverage, and whether the city pairs it with better case management for vulnerable people, which some local officials are now openly calling for. Turning to sports for a quick beat, in the Senators' system, goalie prospect Lucas Beckman is getting a real lift after being traded in the QMJHL from a last-place team to top-ranked Chicoutimi. Since his debut in mid-January, his usage has been climbing, including starting 3 of the last 4, the kind of signal that can matter when an organization is deciding who moves up the depth chart. Now, shifting to higher stakes, and the main thread today is trade, and how much uncertainty is still hanging over Canada's economy. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is taking the U.S. Supreme Court decision, striking down some Trump-era tariffs as a positive sign, but he's also warning that the bigger picture is still unstable. Here's what happened. The Supreme Court knocked down a number of tariffs President Trump had imposed using the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a key legal tool that had been used to justify broad tariff moves. The Trump administration then pivoted to a different mechanism, Section 122 of the U.S. Trade Act, announcing a new global tariff, first described as 10% and later as 15%. Most Canada-U.S. trade is still exempt under CUSMA, but Ford's message is that exemptions can be narrowed and new tools can be used. He pointed specifically to another pathway, Section 232 investigations, the national security-based trade mechanism that has been used to put levies on things like steel, aluminum, copper, some auto parts, and lumber and other wood products. The key point is this: even when one tariff route gets blocked, the policy pressure doesn't necessarily disappear. It often just moves to a different legal lane. Ford says he'll be lobbying U.S. governors at regional meetings in South Carolina and Utah, building pressure ahead of the next CUSMA review window and the U.S. midterm elections. He's also emphasizing contingency planning, arguing Canada has to be ready for the possibility that the U.S. reopens, reshapes, or even threatens to blow up parts of the trade deal. Why this matters locally, especially in Ontario, is that tariff volatility hits the kinds of cross-border supply chains that Ottawa and Eastern Ontario feel too. Auto parts, metals, and the steady churn of suppliers that rely on predictable rules more than headline announcements. And there's a second signal here, tied to defense and industrial policy. Washington is now formally warning the European Union against Buy European defense procurement rules, arguing they could shut U.S. firms out while Europe still keeps access to the U.S. market. It comes just days after Canada rolled out a defense industrial strategy that also emphasizes domestic production. The risk here is spillover. If procurement nationalism hardens among allies, you can end up with a quieter trade fight inside the defense world, one that complicates Canada's plans to build more at home while still depending on U.S. supply chains and approvals. Now back to that forward tease. Ottawa and OpenAI. Federal and provincial officials have summoned OpenAI to Ottawa after reporting that the company flagged and then suspended a ChatGPT account linked to the Tumbler Ridge shooter months before the February 10 attack, but did not notify police at the time. OpenAI's position, as reported, is that the activity didn't meet its threshold for informing law enforcement because it didn't indicate credible or imminent planning, and that the RCMP was contacted only after the shooting. Canada's AI Minister Evan Solomon has publicly signaled frustration with the company's explanation so far. BC's Premier David Eby is pushing for national standards that would require AI companies to report potential threats to police, and there are calls for a public inquiry or coroner's inquest if the answers don't satisfy officials and families. This is one of those policy questions that tends to move fast after a tragedy. What exactly counts as credible? Who decides? And what duty, if any, a private AI company has to escalate risk? The final piece to watch today: timelines. In Ottawa, watch for when police turn that downtown framework into specifics. Staffing, hours, and which locations get sustained coverage. On the trade front, watch what Ford's governor-to-governor push produces, not in slogans but in whether any U.S. state leaders publicly break regs on tariffs ahead of the midterm cycle, and how that interacts with the next CUSMA negotiating rhythm. And on the OpenAI file, watch for whether Ottawa signals it's moving from meetings to rules, especially around mandatory reporting standards and how they'd be enforced. That's the brief for Wednesday, February 25th. Stay with what's concrete and watch the decision points as they come into view.